Good morning and welcome to our Gateway Church online service. We are so glad that you have joined us here today. You know, we are meeting in person and we are located at 147 Marshall Avenue East, right here in North Bay. If you would like to join us, we would love to have you. Our live service starts at 10:30 on Sunday mornings. If you want to find out anything about Gateway, any of our studies or groups that we have going on, you can do so by going to our webpage that is located at www.gpchurch.ca. And once you're there, you can find links to our social media platforms, to our Facebook group, to our Instagram, and to our YouTube channel. If you'd like to reach out to us for any reason whatsoever, you can send us an email, office@gpchurch.ca, or you can give us a call here at the church. Our phone number here is 705-494-4735. This week on Tuesday night, we have our end time study continuing. Right here at the church, we start at 6:30 sharp. Wednesday nights, we have our prayer ministry, again, meeting here at the church. 6:30 we start, and we usually finish off at about 8 o'clock, between 7:30 and 8. Then on Thursday night, we have young adults here, Relentless Movement Young Adults. We meet here at the church again at 7 o'clock. And then Friday nights, we have our junior high, Relentless Movement Junior High, and Relentless Movement Youth meeting here at the church Friday nights at 7 o'clock. All the necessary protocols are in place. We are so thankful, I've said it over and over again, to each of you who continue to support us here at Gateway Church with your giving. You're just coming alongside us and just supporting this ministry. So we just want to give you a great big shout out of thanks for that. If you need to have our e-transfer email, here it is. It's giving@gpchurch.ca. I'll be bringing the word this morning. I'm continuing in our series on the book of Philippians. I trust you are blessed by the message today. God bless you. And again, thank you so much for joining us here at the Gateway Church online service. Good morning and welcome to our service here at Gateway Church again. I'm so glad that you've joined us. Today I'm continuing in this series that Ken has started over a couple of weeks on the book of Philippians. And the book of Philippians focuses on the pursuit of joy. But before we can pursue joy, it's a good idea to have an understanding of what joy actually is. What does a joyful person look like? How can you distinguish a joyful person from a happy person? You can be happy that your favorite hockey team or baseball team or basketball team won. You can be happy because of a great opportunity that has come into your life. So, what is it that makes joy different from these things? I think the main thing is that joy is something that is unaffected by circumstances. And it's a state of mind and a positioning of the heart. Joy is deep. It's a contentment, it's a confidence, and it is also a hope. So this morning we're going to look at some of the specific trials that Paul was facing and how he was actually able to face them with joy. So we're going to be looking at Philippians chapter 1, verses 14 to 18, or rather verses 12 through to 18. So if you have your Bibles, open them up and we'll take a look at those verses today. So the first thing that I want to look at is joy in circumstances. As we already know, Paul was in a jail in the city of Philippi. And he's there after being framed for a crime that he did not commit. He spent 2 years in Caesarea, and then he appealed his case to Rome. And it's hard to imagine what it was like to be in Paul's situation. I can't even begin to imagine. Personally, I've never been jailed myself. But he was isolated from friends and family, and he wasn't able to do what he loved doing. Paul, for over 2 years, had been kept from being able to preach in synagogues and teach in churches, and it was the passion of his life to do that. You'd think it would be tough for Paul to remain positive and joyful, but in spite of all that happened in his life, Paul continues to rejoice. And I don't want us to miss an important point here. Paul is a bold example for us that things don't necessarily always go right or well for believers, for followers of Christ. Times are sometimes difficult. Circumstances are sometimes bad. Difficult times come to those who have been faithful in living their lives of faith. And this is important to hear because sometimes we believe that godly people are spared difficult times. And we seem to think that when hard things happen in our lives, it's a sign that there's something wrong with our spiritual life. And that is not necessarily true. But with that said, listen to what Paul writes to the Philippians as he faces his difficult situations. So I'm reading from Philippians 1, 12 to 14. Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. Paul could have grumbled. He could have pled his case. He could have been bitter. He could have been discouraged, but he wasn't. Instead, we see here that Paul states that his circumstances are being used by God. He points out two positive results of his circumstance. First of all, the palace guard heard the gospel. These were a group of elite soldiers that were stationed in Rome. And the custom was for a prisoner to actually be chained to a soldier, to one of the guards. And I'm sure that some of the guards were harsh, they were not very kind to him, but there was probably some who might have been friendly. But I know one thing for certain, all of them were too close. Yet instead of being bitter about this invasion of his personal space, Paul saw it as an opportunity. Paul realized that he was not only chained to the guards, they were chained to him. He had a captive audience. For hours at a time, Paul could talk to these men about Jesus. And apparently his witness was effective, because Paul remarks that because of his imprisonment, the gospel of Jesus Christ was known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard. Amazing. But there was also a second benefit to his situation. Others spoke the word of Christ more courageously and fearlessly. God used Paul's situation to light a fire, so to speak, under some of the other believers. Perhaps they were encouraged to carry out Paul's work while he was unable to do the work himself. And maybe these people were inspired by Paul's example. Whatever the reason, the message was being proclaimed more boldly because of Paul's situation. I think there's a couple of principles here that we can gain from Paul as to how to find joy in difficult situations. First, we learn that we cannot control our own circumstances. We can control our response to them. We don't have to have no hope when difficult times come. We don't have to withdraw. Paul reminds us that whether a difficult circumstance defeats us or deepens us depends on how we respond to it. We can choose to trust the hand of God even when we don't see clearly. We can choose to believe that God is working for the good, even though the evidence seems to be contradictory to that, seems to be confusing. It won't remove the pain, but it will help us to live joyfully in spite of it. Another principle we see is we need to look for opportunities rather than struggle in our problems. Paul saw an opportunity to share with those he wouldn't encounter any other way. He used his chains as a teaching tool that would strengthen others. He chose to dig deeper rather than to be swept away. I'm going to give you some examples of that. Here, you can grumble about being homebound, or you can take that time to do the reading, the writing, the praying that you've always wanted to have the time to do. You can grumble about financial stresses, or you can take it as a challenge to find contentment and joy in things that don't cost money. You can grumble about your physical condition, or use your physical condition as your motivation for getting started on that exercise program or a good eating plan that you've been putting off. You can grumble and complain about how empty the house is with the kids gone, or you can look for opportunities and new ways to occupy your time. You can grumble about your illness, or you can use the time to deepen your faith and to minister to others. Just think about the many, many people that we encounter when we're actually in a difficult time in our life. People that we don't see at other times, such as doctors, nurses, hospital staff, technicians, maybe police and judges, social workers, troubled people of many types and persuasions, students, other students, neighbors, friends, other people who have faced similar sorrows. If we stop feeling sorry for ourselves in our difficult situations and look around for opportunities to glorify God, we will be amazed. We will find joy as we use those opportunities for God's glory. It's a shift in focus. So, joy when dealing with difficult circumstances. That's the first part of the scriptures that we looked at as it pertains to Paul and his reaction to it. Now I want to look at joy when dealing with difficult people, because there's a second trial that Paul had to endure in this. He was being attacked from other Christians. These were fellow believers, or at least they professed to be. Paul says that they were preaching Christ. They weren't false teachers. They were teaching truth, but with a critical spirit. Listen to how Paul describes the situation in verses 15 to 18 of chapter 1 of Philippians. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambitions, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I am still in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice. Paul says that these people were preaching out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, seeking to stir up trouble for him. They weren't motivated by a desire to reach others for Christ. Their motive was to attack the competition. In some way, they saw Paul's imprisonment as a chance for them to get ahead. They saw their service to Christ as some kind of a competition. So how do we have a joyful response to difficult people? You know, Paul had encountered other difficult people. For example, Paul told Titus that he should warn a divisive person once and then have nothing to do with them. Paul pleads with two women in the church of Philippi to please agree with each other. And Paul told the church in Corinth that cliques were basically stupid and destructive. He confronted false teachers, and he even stood up to Peter and told him that he was being inconsistent. And to be honest, I would have expected Paul's response to come after these difficult people that he writes about in Philippians with the same fervor, the same energy, but he doesn't. Instead, he simply says, and I repeat, what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. So what are we to make of this? When should we stand against difficult people, and when should we back off? And here's what I notice about this situation. Paul was intense when the gospel was misrepresented. He was intense when the unity of the church was threatened, but he was passive when the attacks were personal. And I think his approach was totally the opposite of the way that many of us handle things. We're often provoked to anger or provoked to an intensity in our response when personally attacked. And we're often unmoved when the gospel is distorted and want to stay out of it when the unity of the church is at stake. We have it the flip side around. Paul understood that he wasn't the issue. Did he want to be liked? I'm sure he did. Did it hurt when these men sought to use his problems for their advantage? You bet it did. But Paul overlooked the personal insult and celebrated the fact that God's word was being broadcast. Joy comes when we approach difficult people this way, because difficult people are diffused more quickly when we don't fight them. Our joy isn't tied to the opinion of the crowd, but it is tied to the opinion of the Lord. When we seek to love rather than strike back, we often find that our enemies become our friends. And so here, let me give you 3 final principles that we learn about dealing with difficult people. The first is that we must always look at the big picture. We're seeking to build the kingdom of God, not a kingdom to ourselves. What people say about us is so much less important than what they say about the Lord. Our joy is anchored in His glory, not ours. Another principle we learn about dealing with difficult people is this. We must remember that sometimes we have actually been the difficult person. I don't think Paul ever forgot that at one point in his life, he was zealous for the wrong reasons. He persecuted Christians. He meant well, but he did wrong. So sometimes well-meaning people do hurtful things and don't realize what they are doing. We must continue to act with grace, even when others don't act that way toward us, because someday we might need that grace extended to ourselves. Finally, we must remember that even though other people will disappoint us, God will not. If we anchor our joy to the behavior of others, we will continuously be on a roller coaster all of our lives. People are inconsistent. We must look to the Lord for our satisfaction. We must look to the Lord for our joy. We must have a relationship with the Lord that will be sweet, even if the entire world turns against us. And we've seen this in the lives of martyrs. You pick up a history book and read about some of the martyrs that have gone ahead of us. They have gone to crosses to be burned and died singing. They have been thrown to the lions and died testifying of the Lord's greatness. They have blessed others as they have been ridiculed. They have loved even as they endured hatred. These ones, these martyrs of old, trusted God rather than people or rather than the circumstances in their lives. And the best example of all was a man who spent his life helping others. In return, he was despised and he was rejected. He spoke of love and then was tortured and executed. And he extended forgiveness to his attackers, even as he was nailed to the cross. People will disappoint us, but God never will. He proved it at Calvary. And if you give him a chance, he will prove it in your life as well. And if we remember this and trust God rather than others, you will have joy even in the difficult circumstances of your life. God bless you. I trust this word has just touched a spot in your heart to bring healing, to bring restoration, to bring encouragement and hope. God bless you. Have a wonderful week, and thanks again for watching us here at the Gateway online service.